We're so grateful to have so many people representing from Teach AAPI. I often talk about that organization as a model for how to get really activism happening amongst parents and amongst schools, and that collaboration happening in a really meaningful way. The resources that Teach AAPI offers to us, not just in terms of incredible guests being here, but also in terms of curricular resources, the units of study that have been developed that we are using in the classroom, performers that come to the campus. It has enriched the experience for our students in such a meaningful way. And so thank you, Gloria, I know is one of our parents here who's really instrumental in that. And thank you to all the other parents who I know are involved and supporters of Teach AAPI as well. So this is co-facilitated and put on also with Collage, which is our parent education group that focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, helping have conversations with our children, raising them to be culturally competent, to be sort of warriors of social justice, so to speak. And so I'm gonna introduce Christine, who is one of our parents. She's a parent of a graduate and a parent of a third grader. Oh my gosh, I just can't believe that Athena is that old. And who is one of our several parents who leads Collage. Thank you also, Claire Goldsmith is here today, and Samantha Burren, I think, is zooming in, and we have many other parents on our parent education committee who are incredibly instrumental. So Christine's gonna share a little bit about Collage before we turn it over to our incredible guests here.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. We're really grateful to have you, and we're really grateful to have you staying for the Fireside Chat. As Rose mentioned, Collage is really the parent education and really helping with the disability. I'm sorry, I work in that field. The DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And certainly today is going to be a beautiful, I think, belonging opportunity. But Collage, just to let you all know and remind you, the purpose of Collage is designed for JTD parents, guardians to engage in inquiry, conversation, and action related to issues of diversity, equity, social justice, inclusion, and belonging. The goal of Collage is supporting our families as we strive to raise our children to be culturally competent members of our community, as well as advocates for a more equitable and just world. Really, you summarized that better than I just did. And then the group norms of Collage. If you've ever joined a Collage meeting or you're interested in joining Collage, some of the group norms for our conversations are to listen with the intent to understand and learn and open to hearing others' truth, to lean into discomfort, to suspend judgment and assume goodwill of all that are attending, to speak your truth, to expect and accept non-closure, that can be tough, and then to maintain confidentiality. So we welcome you certainly today, and we also welcome you to any of our future events, which are coming up late February, March, and April. So lots of opportunities. Thank you again for joining today.
Thank you. All right, we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Tan. I am the beauty director at Refinery 29, but most importantly, I'm a mom. My daughter Zoe is back there. She's 3, and I have an almost 1-year-old at home, which is crazy. And I am also part of the Teach AAPI Next Gen board, and I'm so thrilled to be here with Eva Chen. Thank you so much for we know how busy you are. I think everyone here follows you on Instagram. We know how incredibly busy you are. You're just all around the world, so thank you for taking time to be here.
Thank you for having me, and I'm very impressed you're here with a 1-year-old at home and a 3-year-old. Extremely impressive, and your daughter is very well behaved.
Thank you.
Very admirable.
Thank you. It's all the nannies. They help us make it happen. Okay, we've got lots of questions to ask you. First, let's start off with, how are you doing?
Well,
with the first loaded question.
How much time do we have? We've had RSV in the household, COVID twice in the household, rotavirus in the household. I had that, and adenovirus. So it's been a very busy January. January has felt like 85 years, basically. But I'm really happy to be here in the sunshine. The school is beautiful. It's making me question all my life decisions. I also am really happy to be here with this like parent body. LA parents dress a lot better than New York parents. You guys are in heels and stuff. I'm very impressed.
Well, we don't have to deal with like the weather, the
And
snow,
and the walking.
and the walking. Yeah.
Definitely. But I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so you've written 9 children's books now, which is incredible. You've written about everything from different fashion icons, Unisaurus Rexes, all of these incredible women. But a couple years ago, you decided to write about yourself. Was there a moment or like something that happened where you were like, I think I need to tell this really important story?
Yeah, so I wrote the book during COVID. I think everyone knows that COVID was obviously a very hard time for the world, very hard time for us. But I think as an Asian American, it was a very scary time. Even like it was compounded by the fact that I felt like especially worried about my parents. I'm sure everyone remembers around that time, Asian elders were being attacked around the country, senseless violence towards them. And it was really a tough time because even walking around New York City, which is one of the most diverse cities in the world, there was graffiti about the China virus and go back here, go back there, and a lot of derogatory words. This was around the time my daughter was learning to read, and so she could read some of the things that the graffiti that we saw. And so I kind of came up with the idea of writing something that was really positive, affirming, and joyful. I wanted to write a book that was about my parents' story in particular and pay homage to them, and to write a book that I hadn't seen yet. And so it's a story of immigration, it's a story of family, it's a story about feeling insecure and finding joy in yourself. And so it was probably the fastest book I've written. I was very nervous when I was writing it. I was actually saying that to the kids earlier. I was the most anxious about this book because it's very, very autobiographical. There are literally like family pictures, and a lot of the images from the book are from my own personal history. But so I was very especially, gratified to see and to receive a warm response for it.
Can you share some of the like messages you've like received from kids or parents? I know when I first read it to Zoe, I was like crying, which you don't expect when you read a children's book. But I'm sure that people.
I was crying when I wrote it for many reasons. I think I had just had River as well, or I was maybe pregnant. I don't remember. All time has turned into a blur. It's been pretty amazing to speak, especially to parents that are around my age, so it's been amazing to get positive messages from kids, but I actually feel like to hear from parents and to hear from like grown-ups that they didn't have books like this growing up, and having a book like this has been an amazing tool for them to talk to their kids about culture, about family, about belonging, and also about the tough things. There's a moment in I Am Golden about bullying. I was bullied a lot growing up. I grew up in New York City. I went to a private school in New York City where, my brother and I were bullied a lot. And so, that kind of being able to open that dialogue was very important to me, and have parents have that as a tool in their toolbox. Because as parents, what we need is like, when it's hard to talk about with kids sometimes about the tougher things, right? About emotions, about like social dynamics. But if you have a book or something to turn to, it almost makes it easier for the kid to say like, I know how May feels. I'm going through that as well. I found that especially with my daughter, who's on the shyer side, being able to identify with characters in a book helps her to explain how she's feeling. And so I feel really happy that parents and kids had that.
So growing up as a first-generation Asian American, obviously you shared that you were bullied, but did you find community anywhere, or how did you find support, or how did you deal with being bullied?
I couldn't really, that's a very tough question. I should ask my therapist. No, I don't have a therapist right now, actually. I need to find one.
It's
hard because it's like I couldn't talk to my parents about it. And I think this is something that many first-generation children experience. My parents were like the epitome of like recent immigrants to America. They worked 7 days a week, 12, 14, sometimes more hours. And they sent us to school just basically with the kind of sole purpose of like education as a means to, establishing a foundation of this country, education, education, education. They didn't put a lot of, this is obviously a very different time, and as parents now, we are equipped with so much more in our toolboxes, and we have resources like Dr. Becky and many other parenting experts in the books, and we are trying to arm ourselves with knowledge. For my parents' generation, it's like I could never talk about anything like emotional. It would be tough because it's not that they wouldn't understand, but they wouldn't even know how to like deal with it. And the school system was hard because, my parents still barely speak English. Like English is very much their second language. There's a line in I Am Golden that said like, you've become our teacher and translator to the child. And I mean, from the age of like 12, I was probably calling doctors' offices for my parents and like helping them. Even now, like I do like 3 as they've gotten older, I'm like, whoa, I've been doing this a long time. I can like, I feel like a doctor almost. I was talking to an endocrinologist earlier. There you are. And I was like, she has a nodule on her thyroid and she has hypothyroidism. So I didn't have a lot of outlets for it. And I think what helped me the most growing up was reading. And there weren't books like I Am Golden. Sorry, I'm a little bit froggy, by the way. I'm like recovering from
You're doing great.
Various viruses. There weren't books like I Am Golden, but there were amazing books about, the kind of timeless and universal experiences of growing up. So whether it was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is about an Italian, Francine Nolan, I think she was, Irish, obviously, girl's experience and her coming of age. Like, books like that really helped me because it helped me understand that like the emotions that you feel as a child growing up are universal. You can be an Italian, I don't know why I keep saying Italian, Irish immigrant, or you could be Italian, or you can be Australian, or you can have black skin, you can have brown skin, you can have like any kind of skin. And it's like that toughness of growing up is quite universal. So I would say that was my biggest outlet, was like, I really threw myself into books. I was the one who always had books in my backpack. I was always at a bookstore. I was always at the public library. And they became my closest companions and outlets growing up.
Were you always proud to be Asian American? I mean, obviously, aside from the bullying, like for me personally, I feel like I grew up in a very like predominantly white, neighborhood, school. All my best friends were blonde. I wanted to be blonde, that whole story. And I feel like it wasn't until college is like when I found sort of like my people. And, after college, then like I really feel like I started to really connect with my culture. Was it the same for you? Maybe was it like when you started working in fashion, maybe, and you like started to see other people in your field?
Definitely was not in fashion. It wasn't not when I worked in fashion, but I would say quite similar. I grew up in New York City. I went to several schools in New York. Most of them, I was one of like 2 or 3 Asians. It's very different now, very, very different. And it's different for like Ren and Tao and River, their school experiences. I think my closest, like it was probably around college. Many of my closest friends are Asian American. And we're all very proud of our culture, and I can see the kind of care and hopes and kind of cultural richness imbued into the way we talk to our kids. But I think that now in some ways it's harder and easier, right? Because now we live in an era where it's like we're all like on our phones all the time, and you can feel disconnected from the world in some ways. But I do also feel like there are more resources like Teach AAPI, like there are organizations like Gold House that are trying to promote, Asians in culture. There are comedians, actors, actresses, athletes that are like featured prominently, that kids and teens now. It was amazing when the 6th graders were like, oh my gosh, Chloe Kim. Like you could tell they knew who they were, whereas I didn't really feel like I had that growing up. And so this pride in being Chinese American and the child of immigrants, I think it's something also that like can build over time. It can be tough because sometimes I think that, even within racial groups or in diversity groups, people can say like, well, what is Asian enough? I remember I was in college and someone was like, oh, you're not Asian enough to be part of this group. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Excuse me. You know, and it's hard because even things like that can feel so divisive when it's like, we should all be in it to the goal of like educating the people around us and also like the next generation to feel pride in who we are.
Definitely. I just have to say, you're not that much older than me, but I knew I always wanted to go into like editorial and magazine, and seeing you doing that really encouraged me to be like, I can do this too. So
And now I'm the one grilling you about beauty secrets. I was like, Sarah, where do I get a facial in LA? Tell me about do you know about this Medicube device?
yes, I do.
Like, how does it work?
I can't tell you the science behind it, and
Okay.
I'm really not.
It's so suspicious.
It
Do you guys
is.
know about this device? I keep getting ads for it on Instagram. It's called the Medicube. Michelle Yeoh uses it. Do you have one? Does it work?
Do you do like each side at night? Right.
Is it like, I want well, we'll talk after, but it's like the one with the blue light.
Yeah.
It's the Hailey Bieber skin.
Yeah. Well, that's not fair. She's 26.
No, but I've DM'd them to be like, what is the science behind your device? And they saw it and did not respond.
They left you on red.
Yeah. And I'm like,
Maybe it's proprietary.
So I'm asking all my friends who work in beauty, I'm like, can you do an investigation? Because I don't want to spend $300 on like an LED.
I have the Lima laser. Which
I have
is
that
like,
too.
I don't know if that one's
I
working
think that
either.
one works.
Do you?
I think it works
For
very
$3,000.
slowly. Very, very slowly. It's more for glow versus drastic results.
Yeah.
Anyway, I bet you guys didn't think we'd be talking about beauty today.
If you have beauty questions at the end, we'll have
You
the
can
Q&A portion.
ask. Yeah.
Um,
How did we even start talking about the Medicube?
we're in beauty.
Oh, beauty,
Yeah.
beauty. Okay.
Okay, I think I don't need to share this statistic, but I love data, so I will. I think everyone knows. So in the most recent census, it said that nearly a third who reported being of 2 or more races were under 18, which means, you know, the future Gen Alpha and beyond are going to be just this beautiful mix of cultures. Both you and I know that firsthand. Your children are, you know, a beautiful mix, and I would love to know, how do you honor all the different parts of them at home and help them to not only be proud, but also be like aware and educated of all of their different cultures, the ancestors?
It is a constant struggle is not the wrong word, is the wrong word, but it's like, it's just like a constant process, right? So my kids are Chinese, American, British. Tom is like half Welsh, I think, and like 6 other things. And it's hard because we want to like honor all of them and kind of expose and talk about all of them. But it's also like, how? You know? And then it's also like, to me, and my personal advice, not to turn this on my parents, this is being recorded, and my parents going to see this?
They're watching the live stream
not to
right
like
now.
turn it onto my parents, but it's like, to my parents, I'm like, talk to the kids, share your experience, talk about like Chinese traditions, like speak to them in Chinese, take them to Chinatown, go to the Lunar New Year banquet with the school. And my parents are always like, we don't need to do that. And I'm like, we don't have time to do it. And I'm like, but who? You are the physical manifestation. So it's a constant education that I'm trying to educate myself, like, because so much of my experience of being Chinese American and Asian American is just like ingrained in me, right? Like I celebrate Lunar New Year like as a reflex. Like it's family gatherings, we eat this, we do that. But then like I have to consciously like teach my kids about why we're doing it. Yes. And even a lot of the myths around Lunar New Year, like in Chinese culture, we talk about like Nian, which is like the dragon, and it's why we, you know, wear red and make loud sounds and firecrackers. Like I was telling my mom this story and she was like, really? And I'm like, yeah, can you tell the story of Nian? And my mom's like, I don't know it. And I'm like, you are Chinese. Please teach my kids. And so I do find that it's like constant education, which is why like I think organizations like Teach AAPI, like I'm learning too, you know? But it's something that I hope that like my daughter, for instance, recent was like, oh, she's Chinese like me. And I'm like, like it was like a big moment for me. And my kids, we talk about it a lot. We talk about like eye shape a lot, skin color a lot, hair texture a lot. Because I think it's important not to shy away from those conversations.
Yeah. Back to the bullying part. Do you have any advice for parents whose children are bullied for being different? Maybe not just, for being a different race, but just for being different.
Yeah, it's so hard because, my daughter's in third grade, and starting in second grade, we started hearing about at her school, not affecting her, but her friends. And I think kids in general are often very, like it's just in their natures to point something out. Like for me, they would be like, "Oh, you're old," and I'm like, "I am old. I feel old." But it's like they say things not often in a way that's meant to hurt, but it's like based on curiosity or observation, and they haven't learned the nuance yet of like saying things in a way to not hurt people's feelings or to offend someone. It's really hard. I think most schools are able to have that education baked in from a very early stage, starting in like pre-K, kindergarten, talking about differences, doing education in different units around differences. I recognize that not every school is able to do that or can do that. But I do think, as parents, talking a lot about differences and trying to help kids understand that like differences are superpowers. And that doesn't mean that they're not hurt in the moment. And I think that supporting your children and making them understand that they are safe with you is always really important. And saying like, because what you don't want to say, is like, "Oh, well, that person doesn't know," or that person is like, and just dismiss it, because that kind of cuts the child's like communication off, and then they don't want to bring you the next time it happens. But just making sure that like it's an ongoing dialogue about feelings and being okay to talk about emotional vulnerability, because I think a lot of kids nowadays, they grow up faster than ever. They feel pressured to be perfect or to kind of reach some sort of ideal that they're getting from external factors, social media, friends, etc. And so being able for them to understand that they're safe with you, they can, if they don't want to talk about it, you kind of have to let it go, and just try to bring it up in organic ways. And yeah, making them feel safe, I think, is the most important thing.
That's great advice. So your most recent book, We Are Golden, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
You wrote it because of the lack of education around Asian American history that's taught in schools, which is why Teach AAPI exists and is so important. How do you think we can all further our mission to help the younger generation learn more about the contributions of our community?
Oh, well, this organization is amazing. I think a really micro, easy step is making sure that the kids' books libraries are stocked with books like that really reflect the diversity of the students. And so outside of just like, Asian American and Asian kind of themes, like books like Hair Love or Julian as a Mermaid, like any books that reflect experiences that might not be the student body. And that's literally like talking to the librarian. Like I do think librarians are oftentimes the gatekeepers, not in a negative way, but they're the ones who open up the kind of gates to wonder and curiosity and knowledge. I like my kids' librarian, Tao's librarians, like we email like all the time. We nerd out over books. It's like the best. I love a librarian. Like I will talk to librarians like all day. And so like making sure librarians are well stocked, showing them movies or pieces of culture that are not from their experience, but also are, especially for like Asian students. And I would just say like, I don't know, I grew up in a family that wasn't the most, and I think many of you probably experienced this as well, grew up in a family that wasn't the most like emotive and openly expressive, right? Even now talking about, my mom's having this huge family reunion, it's like 30 people, it's happening at my apartment, I had to buy like giant folding tables, like that in the back, it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then like I sent this whole spreadsheet to my dad and he was just like, good, period. Okay. Meanwhile, I'm like wheeling in these huge folding tables for my family. But it's like, I think having that kind of conversation and dialogue, and even if the families aren't it's not that they don't want to do it, but they don't have the tools to do it. Like having opportunities to kind of like conversation points, you know, like a book. I saw like, I keep getting another ad I keep getting on Instagram. It's called like questions for your parents. It's like a card deck that you're supposed to ask. And the ad is like questions to ask your parents before they die. Like, oh my God, I bought it. It worked. Like,
Oh, great.
Yeah. I buy a lot of things off Instagram ads, apparently. But, you know, I did buy it. I lost it immediately because my kids thought it was like Uno. And they were like, what is this? And they were like, it's somewhere in my apartment. But it's like anything that can encourage conversation. Writing the book, I Am Golden, actually did open the window and the door a lot to have conversations, but it's still hard, like pulling it out of my parents, because I do think for my parents moving to the US with it was like, there is some trauma there that they're not prepared to, my dad especially doesn't necessarily want to unpack, but it is that classic story. He like came to the US, he had very, very little. He worked as a Chinese food delivery person on the Upper East Side. Like they lived in Queens. Like my mom talks about like the hardest. I asked her once like what was the hardest part about moving here, and was it the language? Was it this? Was it that? And she was like the loneliness, you know. And so it's like and she doesn't often want to talk about it, which is understandable. But even having that small insight into this woman that I think is like incredibly strong, like really helped me understand her experience better.
Have you read Connie Wang's book about her mother?
Yes.
Yeah. It's like a really beautiful.
And you know it is very gratifying when I go to a bookstore, when I see that there are so many more Asian authors sharing that experience, because we represent a huge population in the US. But I do feel like culturally, it's not that we're quieter. It's not that we are not afraid to like tell our stories. It's just for some reason at times like we can feel overlooked, even though we represent a huge number in the US. And so when I go to a bookstore, it does make me feel like heartened to see like more names like mine, because it means our stories are being told. Or when I turn on Netflix and I see the proliferation of like Asian helmed content, whether it's my favorite TV show, Singles Inferno. Love that show. Obviously, that's
a good
Korea.
representation of
or
our
like
people.
The Brother's Son, or so Beef, like, you know, and you know, comedians like Ronnie Chiang kind of selling out Radio City Music Hall. Every win is a win for all of us, but not just Asians. It's a win for all of us as like Americans, because like we are meant to be like, I know the melting pot analogy is like, you know, probably overused and people have feelings about it, but it's like we are meant to be this like have richness in culture, and so it's a win for all of us.
Absolutely. What was that thing that we bought Dad that he was supposed to like answer all those questions? It was like Storyworth or something like that.
Oh, I get ads for
Oh my
that
God.
too.
We bought it and then he didn't do it. He didn't want to do it.
Oh, no.
You're supposed to like answer. It's like asks you
like
different questions about like your childhood, you know, your past, and he was like, I don't really want to do this.
And
Yeah, he did 2 questions. It's hard. Like you said, it's hard for them to like revisit or think about it. But I do think one thing that's amazing about this book is the pictures that you pulled. That
Yes.
really helps because there's a story behind every photo.
The biggest way I've been able to get my dad to share about family and history, again, sorry, my voice is so shaky, is through photos. So my grandfather on my dad's side passed away very young. And I've asked my dad to bring photos to show my kids. And also like, I don't want to say like I blatantly lie, but sometimes I blatantly lie. I will say like, oh, I got a store credit to this framing company and I'd love to frame some pictures. Can you bring some and I'll frame some for you? And then he's like, oh, I will lose. And he's like, oh, I don't want to do it. I'm like, I will lose money.
Well, then if you're going to lose
It's like
money.
for the Mandarin speakers, it was, 我会浪费钱. I'm going to waste money if I don't do this. And then he'll be like, oh, fine. And so he'll bring photos. I really hope they're not watching this. And then he'll be like, oh, this. And then I get to hear all the stories and see all the photos. And he showed me this album that, you know, his father who was in the military, like, you know, so I think visual sometimes helps. So feel free to use my I will waste money hack or something like that to
Or
try.
blame the kids. Say like, oh,
School
Zoe
project.
School project. She needs a photo of you when you were in your 30s or whatever.
That is a school project. Yeah. I've had to do it many times.
Okay, we have to ask you about social media because you work at Instagram. Again, you're like probably a lot of people's favorite person to follow on Instagram here. The kids. I know it's a very hot topic, but I want to ask about, because I think a lot of parents here have younger kids, and there's that, discussion about sharing their photos without their consent, things like that. How do you deal with that? Because we love following you and seeing your kids grow up. It's really amazing. But I think that it's a scary world. What is your advice?
Yeah, I mean it's very personal, right? Like I have friends who never show their kids' faces. I have friends who, if you look at their social media, you can't even tell they have kids. It's like they've completely not shown any aspect of that, which I understand. I have friends who show everything. I have friends who will show their kids in like various states of undress in a bathtub, like taking a bath. It really is like such a wide range. For me, it's tricky because I think about this a lot. I do share the kids and their faces. I tend not to. I do have that kind of filter in my head of like, would my kid be embarrassed about this in a year or 2, 3 years, 6 months from now? I don't share it. I have close friends groups that are actual friends that I share more to. But for me, it's like my kids are like such a huge part of my life and my joy and my just our family story. My kids are total goofballs. If they ever say like no pictures, which they never do, like they ham it up. Like my River, and it's like River, all my kids went through a phase where they loved playing with face filters on Instagram. Like River will always ask for the Pat McGrath butterfly lashes when he wants to be like butterfly lashes or fire, and I'm like, I don't. But it's like it's a lot of it is balance, and also it's hard to answer this question because it's like it's the parenting styles. Some parents don't believe in timeouts, other ones like swear by a timeout. So it's like I think every family has to come to their own conclusion. But like I do plan. I'm saying this now with Ren at 9, who has asked for a cell phone, right? Like it begins very young. They all ask for Apple Watches. I don't know if it's the same in LA. They start out with Apple Watches, then they get something called a Gizmo, then they ask for like a phone. And I've told her, I'm like, you're not getting a phone until you're 16. And she's like, huh? And I'm like, it's only 7 years from now. She's like, what? But, we'll see how long I can hold out. And I also understand that a lot of parents do choose to do it for safety reasons. And especially in a city like LA where they're in cars, they're in buses, and there's transportation involved. I understand it, but it is it's so personal and it's tough. It's like parenting. Parenting is personal.
So when will Ren be able to use Instagram?
Well, technically, you have to be 13 to be on Instagram. That's in our user agreement. And then anyone under 13 technically is supposed to have like you'll see this with child actors. Sometimes it'll say like managed by mom and dad.
Totally.
Ren recently said she didn't say Instagram specifically, but she was like, I want to share, like, do you ever feel like you want to share the books you're reading so that people can know what books are great? And I'm like, yes.
A little book influencer.
Am I raising a bookstagrammer? But I probably not until like she's older. Like I just, and I told her, I was like, when she asked for a phone, she was like, why not? I would only use it for emergencies. I wouldn't like watch Netflix on it. And I said, like, it's not that I don't trust you. It's not that I don't trust, like, I know that you would do the right thing. Ren is like very much a rule follower. But I was like, sometimes there are like, not, how there are bullies at your school. There are sometimes not so nice people. Like there are a lot of people like that in the world. And sometimes if people don't know you, they're even meaner because they can hide behind a screen and a fake name. And she was like, oh, okay. And then we just changed the subject. But it's tough. It's like, it is, I experience it firsthand. I have a lot of friends with teens, like teen children, and I see how tough it is.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question before we turn it to the audience. What are some other children's books that you are loving right now, or some that are favorites for your children outside of yours?
My kids have very specific taste in books. So we'll start with River, because he's 2.5 and he has no taste in books besides like literally eating them. He really loves like anything with vehicles. Like he likes that book by John Cena, the actor, Elbow Grease.
I didn't know he was an author.
I know he's an author, like a New York Times bestselling author. Good for him. He loves Richard Scarry, so all of the Busytown books, he loves those. Tao has very particular taste in literature. He reads a lot of nonfiction. He is like Tao, my 7-year-old, is literally like a little Tom. He's like my most British of all my kids. He's a little bit more reserved. He really loves books about history, so he's reading books like the 18 bloodiest battles in American history. And then he and Tom talk about it. And then Tom's taking him to Gettysburg. He's 7.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he is like, if he were on stage right now, he would be like, did you know in 1842, the blah, 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 Titanic, blah, 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 Captain John, blah, blah, blah. And he like knows all of it. Wow. It's very strange. When he was applying to schools, like, is there anyone from admissions here? I don't know. Okay. So my son literally would like go into these admissions office and he would be like, did you know that 300 people died in the Titanic? Of those, 250 died of frostbite. Their limbs fell off one by one. And I'm like, and we kept getting feedback from our like ex-missions director who was like, maybe can he not talk about the Titanic? And I was like, I don't know, because he's like interested in it, and it's like the confluence of history, geography, science.
Very impressive,
it's like
with the
really
stats.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, they think it's a little dark. And I'm like, it is a little dark, but I don't know what to do.
It's history.
So I tried to guide him towards like the Golden Gate Bridge, because I was like, oh, that's engineering. The schools will like that. But then he always finds a way. Then he'll be like, did you know in building the Golden Gate Bridge, 9 people died? And I'm like, oh my God. And he's like interested in viruses and virus replication, and he could see what, especially during COVID, like he'll be like, that is the microphage virus. And I'm like, oh my God, you're so weird. But I love it. It's really great. So his books are very specific.
Okay.
Ren loves fiction. Mm-hmm. She loves graphic novels. She is reading a book called Hoot right now, which I think is like, I don't know what it's about, but apparently it's great. Tom's reading it to her every day. She loved a book called A Wolf Called Wander. There's a book, the John Eggers book I just bought. Oh, Dave Eggers, the one that just won like every single award. It was like $30. It's like a children's book that is priced like an adult book. Wow. The audacity. Genius. And I'm trying to think what else she loves. She loves The Babysitter's Club. There's a book called Witches of Brooklyn, which is a great graphic novel that has an Asian protagonist. It's really great. And she loves this series called I Survived, which is like, I survived the Chicago fire. I think she literally was influenced by Tao in that series. So she loves that series. And then there's like science comics, like where it's like everything to know about bats. And so she really loves graphic novels. She learns a lot through pictures, and she needs the connection of pictures to text to help her remember things. I'm the same way. We're very visual learners, and that's, I think, been the biggest change for me. Is like when I was growing up, I feel like schools were they taught in one way, and they were optimized for one type of learning. And I think what's great about and different is that like I know that Tao is an auditory learner. He learns very easily through listening. It's very like he learns in a very traditional sense, whereas Ren needs a lot of like physical stimulation. She needs to touch things, hear things, but also see them. It's very multisensory, and so I think that's one great thing about education now is that you know so much more about kids and the way they learn. That has nothing to do with like any of this, but. Since I'm in a school environment, just wanted to say it.
Thank you. Okay, now some time for questions. Does anyone have any?
You know, you took a non-conventional route to your career. Like, how did your parents reconcile with that? Did they have any issue, or did they have aspirations of you becoming a doctor, a lawyer, And then like when did that transition happen? And then the second part is like, how are you supporting your kids to find their passion?
So that's a great question. I don't know if it's fully been reconciled yet. It is filed in our ongoing traumas folder. So I grew up very much believing that like there were three careers: doctor, banker, lawyer. I did always do pretty well in science classes. And like when I was in high school, I would volunteer at like hospitals or medical centers as like, I don't think they have candy stripers anymore, but like I basically worked in that environment in doctors' offices. So I very much thought I was going to be a doctor. I went to Johns Hopkins. My parents had like, yes, Eva Chen, like neurosurgeon, cardiologist, something. And it was terrible for me. It was very, very hard because like knowing what I know now about the way I learn, no wonder I would be in a lecture hall at Hopkins of like 500 kids, like everyone from Hopkins is pre-med. And like I literally could digest, like none of it sank in, and I really struggled. And it's like I was studying like 8 hours a day to get a B+, and organic chemistry killed me. Where's the doctor? There you are. Yeah, you did it. Good for you. But I think it's meant to weed out the weak, and I made it through Orgo 1, and at Orgo 2, I was like, I can't do this. And it was really hard because when I told my parents I didn't want to continue with pre-med and wanted to be an English major, because I always loved to write, and I always, as I mentioned, found solace and comfort in books, it was very, very hard. My dad basically, like, the Asian dad move of being really stoic and just like not saying anything. I think that's almost worse than the Asian mom, at least my mom mood of being hysterical and screaming at me. And I don't think they talked to me for a while. And even when I switched over to editorial, it's like they struggled to understand, like, I think for what it is like a lot of the paths that we're talking about, doctor, banker, lawyer, they're quite like, there's like a process to it and a predictable path to it. You do med school for fill in the blank years, then you do a residency, internship, et cetera, fellowship, whatever. And it's quite linear, and you can kind of like almost graph it out. Editorial, as Sarah knows, is like all over the place. You can be a beauty assistant for like 3 years. You could be a beauty assistant for 3 months and get promoted. You could be an editor and never make it to senior editor or director. There are like, nowadays, probably like 6 editor-in-chief roles left. And what does it even mean these days? And so I think what was the hardest for them is that they just, the struggle to understand that path. And so when I kind of sat them down and I was like, started explaining, literally, I was a beauty editor too. It's the best job. And I was like, here are the beauty directors. They're all super accomplished. I remember telling them about like Sarah Brown and Emily Doherty, who was the beauty director of Elle at the time, and they were both amazing, iconic, and both amazing mentors to me. And I remember being like, Emily Doherty went to Yale and she chose to be a beauty editor. And they were like, oh. And it worked for them a little, like not to stereotype, but it really like, and it's like, I don't know that they still fully understand what I do. It's like, so I work at, as I was explaining to the 3rd grader, I have like, obviously I write books. I do that generally every night from like, not every night, not when I'm not writing a book, but when I'm writing books, it's usually from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. because it's the only time I have white space in my brain and my emails stop coming in and I don't have the constant onslaught of stimulation that I know everyone in this room experiences, of kids wanting you, of family needing you, of work needing you, and just things to do and doctor's offices to call, etc. So the children's book aspect is one thing. My job at Instagram is like, today is a vacation day for me, but it's like, it's pretty many hours a day. It's basically like working with companies, public figures, whatever, working to help them understand the platform and how to use the platform better. So some days I'm meeting with the CMO of like multinational billion-dollar fashion company. And then other days, it's like going to Paris Fashion Week and like representing the company, right? My parents see that job and they very much only see the going to fashion shows. And so they think my job is just to go to events, which is actually like less than 1% of my job. And so my mom and dad will often call, even on the way here, they called and they were like, hey, or my mom will be like, can you talk? And I'm like, it's Tuesday at 1 p.m. I'm like in a meeting. And they'll be like, okay, well, I'm just gonna call you because the meeting can't be that important. And I'm like, oh my God, Mom. So I still don't think they fully understand, but I think maybe that when Ren No, because like when it's just like the boundary thing is challenging for my parents, and I think that's a generational thing maybe. I think when it comes to my kids, I very much want them to, I think when people pursue things they're passionate about, they will be good at them, period. Like pre-med for me was square peg, round hole. I think the one practice or kind of jurisdiction that I would have done well in is dermatology, actually. Bringing it back to the Medicube, but I probably would have loved to be a dermatologist, like, you know, lancing pimples and stuff. I would have been Dr. Pimple Popper. I would have like a YouTube empire. But for my children, I want them to pursue their passion because I think that's what will lead to success. And I think that is coming from a position of like honestly privilege that they're going to be able to do that. I 100% understand why my parents wanted me to pursue something very stable, foundational, and like respectable, because it was, they wanted to counteract the instability and the anxiety, social anxiety that they had when moving here. But I would dream of my kids doing things that they're passionate about, and maybe that is being a doctor, maybe it is being a lawyer. I think Tao would be a great engineer, but it's kind of going to be up to them. I also very much want them, and again, this is just me, I would love them to take intermittent breaks from school. Like, I guess for me personally, it's like, I can't think of a time that I haven't worked. Like literally I went from internship to Hopkins. I started my first, like I left Hopkins. It's like, there's a whole nother backstory, but I worked at a law firm. I literally started like 2 days after coming back from Baltimore, went straight into magazines. I've never taken time off between jobs. I would love my kids to have a gap year. I would love them to take time before college. I have heard about kids actually taking like time off before high school now even. And I'm kind of like, I don't think that's a bad idea. Before, like if they take some time off too, because I think the opportunity to live in the world and experience life, especially for children who are more and more pressurized, is such a rare one. And if I'm able to, I would like to give my kids time to like have that white space and be creative.
So much of what you said was so resonant, especially when I think about our parents and being the child of immigrants. And now as a parent, having a lot of tenderness and empathy for them and what they went through. But I also feel, I don't envy being an immigrant parent in the 80s from Asia and 90s. The one part that I do envy, however, is the simplicity of news sources and news media. And as a parent now getting ready for 2024 election cycle, my kids were babies in 2016 and 2020, and now they're older. What worries me the most is not so much like what positions we take as a family, and I'm not even ready to digest everything that I'm seeing current events wise. It's more of like what adults around them are modeling for how divisive and like civic public discourse kind of sounds like an oxymoron these days. How are you as a parent navigating that as your kids are getting older and with being circumspect about news sources or bringing home what they're hearing in school in a time that feels as divisive as ever?
That is, it's such a tough question. And honestly, like, I am figuring it out probably as I go along, just as everyone else in this room is. Everything is basically feels, it's tough because it's like, I think about, and I'm sure the schools in LA are going through something similar. In New York, there have been several instances of like parents loudly leaving school communities because they were like, oh, I don't like the way fill in the blank is taught at the school. Or I don't like that parents have to be called, I don't remember this happened at a school last year in New York where it's like they had sent out a manual that was probably very, very well intended, but like it got picked up by the press and it was like splashed like, oh, this super woke school, X, Y, and Z. Ironically, it's like one of the oldest schools in New York. It's tough because I feel like I very much grew up being told what to believe and being told this is what you believe. And my parents didn't talk about politics at home outside of the politics of what was happening in Taiwan or China. The election on Jan 13 was a big topic of conversation between me and my dad. It's especially for me in the last election, I feel like, I'm trying to think of a way to say this without sounding like ignorant, I guess, but like that election was very taxing on my family, me. Let's be real. It's very, very taxing on me. I feel like emotionally like rot by the end of it. This is a year, 2024 is an election year, not just for the US, but I think it's like for 49% of the world population. Like every major country across the world, there is an election like the one that we're about to enter. And this year I've just been kind of trying to protect my peace a little bit around it. And I'm trying to like have a slow roll into it. But it's tough because it's like literally Ren came home and was like, oh, I heard about the election. Which president is the one that doesn't like women? I mean, she asked me that. And, you know, thinking of a response to that without, you know, going too hard was tough. And so it's like, first I'm always like, oh, where did you hear that? With like big wide eyes, trying to like buy time. But I try to be as matter of fact about things when I'm explaining things to her without sugarcoating it, because I think the more you hide things, or the more you are overly like shouting or emotional about it, it actually makes it worse for the kids. And like very, very sadly around like, you know, my kids' schools, I got an email about like drills, like, you know, safety drills. And it's like very scary for me as a parent to read about that. But it's something that is like, you know, obviously really important to talk to the kids about. But the way I'm trying to do it while hyperventilating inside, don't get me wrong, I'm like freaking out, and then I like go into a different room and I'm like, oh my God, like, but like I do try to be as matter of fact about things as possible, just to, because if I can try to be calm about it, then I'm trying to like impart that to them. I don't know if that really answers your question, but hopefully it's helpful.
I have one comment and then one question. I just wanted to share that, like, hearing you talk about your relationship with your parents, I can tell you love them so deeply, you're so close. It actually makes me think about like ways that I need to work on personally to kind of connect with my parents.
Oh, but they drive me crazy.
I know,
get me wrong.
same.
Like I complain about them constantly.
But the way I deal with it, and I'm sure my parents are not live streaming this, but the way I deal with it is I avoid it. So I feel like that connection becomes so important, especially as they get older. So thank you for sharing that, because it's a good reminder. The question that I have is, you talk about doing so much and being so much to everyone around you. So how does Eva take care of Eva?
Well, tomorrow I have 5 hours free, and I plan to embark on a 5-hour spree of radical, extreme self-care. So I put it out on Instagram. I was like, anyone know a facialist in K-Town who can make me look like, you know, Giori from like Singles Inferno? They were like, you need more than 5 hours for that, and possibly many medical procedures. I struggle with that, to be honest. I very much feel like many of us in this room probably are a sandwich generation, where it's like we have young children. Like I have a 2-year-old who's like pooping all over the place, trying to potty train. And then I also have parents who are, you know, like something that I don't show on social media because my parents are very private, but my dad has had like a pretty major surgery a year for the last 4 years. And it's like, anyone who knows, like when you have someone in their 70s who has had a lot of health issues, it's incredibly taxing, from like the home care that I coordinate to the hospital stays. I'm the one who's talking to the doctors. Like I'm the one who's finding the surgeons. I do every medical appointment. And so I do really struggle with that. I think a lot of my self-care is like, it's stolen time, basically. So it's like, if I finish my last call at 5:30 and I'm very lucky to have an amazing nanny who leaves at 6, it's like I have half an hour. And sometimes I will literally just go to the Italian restaurant like in my building and just order a plate of like giant pasta and eat it and just like think like, this tastes so good. Or I will like literally go to the nail salon and be like, I can like get one of those chair massages. Like I feel like I snatch a lot of little time, but it's like I have friends who I'm quite envious of them sometimes, because I'm like, wow. Like I was talking to a mom, she has one kid who's 2. She was like, I just came from a week and a half, my first ever vacation. I did a retreat in Utah and I did yoga 4 times a day. And I was like, tell me more. And then all the moms were like, what? And she was like, had bouncy hair and like looked so healthy and like glowing. And I think there will be a time for it. But I think when it comes to my parents, and they drive me crazy, but I also am like incredibly grateful to them for, you know, everything they've provided for myself and my brother. And then also, I don't want to look back and say, I wish I had fill in the blank. And that's not the healthiest way. I'm sure like if anyone in this room is a therapist, that's like not the healthiest way to live either. But I do feel like they always did the most or tried in their own way to do the most for their family. And so I want to try to do the most. But it doesn't always work because my parents are very also codependent on me. And everything from like, how do I book an Uber to like, can you make a reservation for me? And I'm like, why can't you do it? You know, it's like, it's tough. Like I get very frustrated at times. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions? One or two? Just, I want to be mindful of time. Okay.
I'm not sure if you have a lot of time for this, but would love to know what you're reading these days, or what you've enjoyed recently, or what you're looking forward to, particularly any Asian writers. And also, when are we going to be able to get Tom's Granola at stores in LA?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Tom's Granola launched in Whole Foods in New York, in the East Coast, all the East Coast stores, 2 weeks ago. And I think 2025 is the goal to do West Coast. It's like kind of a coastal business. I think he might be doing a pop-up at like Brentwood Country Market. Is that like a good thing? It's everyone was like, it's very cool. It's like, it's very goopy. So it's like, there's a goop there. And then there's one, like he's been in conversations with Erewhon. But the problem is that he has one ingredient, like one raisin that he uses that like is not Erewhon approved. So it's like, but the problem is that the raisin is like, this golden raisin is like very important to him. And it has like naturally occurring sulfites because like raisins naturally oxidize, I guess. And like that's the powder on the skin, but he can't remove that because it's naturally occurring. But Erewhon has an issue with it. I don't know. So, I don't know yet. In terms of what I'm reading, so I used to be a nonfiction reader, and I love reading like books about like the Great Influenza. And then I stopped because I felt like my brain recently, what my brain needs at night is like something pretty easily digestible where I don't need to remember anything. Even Duolingo has become like stressful for me because I'm like, that owl is like nagging at me. That owl is like, and I'm like, oh man, like I don't know if I need this, but I do it begrudgingly. I'm doing Chinese because one of my biggest regrets is not listening to my parents and dropping out of Chinese school at like the age of 12. And I do wish I had stayed in. So I'm like trying to like learn to read. It's really hard. So I read a lot of like fantasy, and a lot of it is not the most literature-y books. And so right now it's funny because all these books are all over TikTok and Reels. It's like Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorn and Roses series. They're like not really appropriate for teenagers in my opinion. So I reread that because it's being made into a TV show. And then I'm right now reading a book called Divine Rivals. And it's like a fantasy romance set in like a dystopian time, and it is better written than most of the ones I've read. But it is not an AAPI author. I'm rereading Pachinko, or I keep saying that I'm rereading it because it makes me sound smart. No, but I do plan to reread it. I love Min Jin Lee. She's a really strong follow on Instagram as well. I love everything about her and her energy. She's very inspirational to me. And so I'm rereading that too. And I loved her Free Food for Millionaires. If you haven't read it, it's excellent. Time for one more question. Is there one more question? No? An easy question? Yes. Are you gonna? Don't ask me about like family trauma.
I noticed, so I'm on the search for a jade bangle. You both have jade bangles. So any special stories or memories or about that?
Mine is I've had mine since I was probably 18, or 20. I was young, I think I was in college, maybe a senior in college, so I was 21. And my parents got it, I think in Hong Kong, and brought it over. And then I have one, my mom has one, and then my sister-in-law has one, all from the same store. And so I don't know about where to get one, but there is a jewelry designer named Millian Noah. She's her name is Jen Tran, and she, if you were ever looking for a jade pendant or a jade bracelet, she does the most stunning engraving. So you could literally give her a picture of a child, a puppy, something that's important to you, an astrological sign, and she will have it engraved. And so were I to ever need another jade bangle, I would have her probably make one with etching on it. Yeah, it's really, what she makes really special work. It's really, and she makes it with you every step of the way. And she's AAPI, so yeah.
I think with that, we'll close. I want to thank Eva Chen so much for being here, for reaching out to us and offering your very precious time to super relatable. I just feel like I learned so much today. Really, I know you've been fighting a cold, so thank you so much for being here. Sarah, so much for, facilitating this, bringing us Eva, and just being a wonderful Next Gen board member. I want to thank JTD. Haley, thank you so much for helping us coordinate this. To the collage team, to Gloria for all of this. And then a last shout out to the Teach AAPI team who brought it together, especially to Michelle who coordinated everything. Yeah, and then Jennifer. So thank you so much.